Hello, good day to one and all. This is Miss A. Krishna Sundar, Assistant Professor, Department of English, KAHM Unity Women's College, Mancheri. Today we are going to discuss Unit 4, which is titled as Elements of Writing from the text Writing for Academic and Professional Success. We have already discussed part 1 and we have gone through the terms narration, description, and illustration. So we would be continuing this with part 2 and part 3. So let's start with part 2, and the first term here is argumentation. So what is argumentation? Now, any topic in this world will be having different versions, which means people will give different opinions on one single topic. So the one side or the one perspective that you take or that you side with is your argumentative style, which means the writer should take one side of the topic, either a yes side or a no side, or maybe a positive side or a negative side, and that standpoint you take when you write something is what you call as an argumentative style of writing. So an easy example would be the topic demonetization. If you look at this kind of a topic, some people would say demonetization was really good. They would speak about the positive aspects, but on the other hand, some others would say demonetization had a number of negative effects. So when you write in an argumentative style, you have to establish your point by supporting it with evidence. You just can't say, oh, demonetization is very good. Or you just can't say demonetization is very bad. Because when you say this, you will have to support your point with valid data. So this should be an opinion with a valid reason. So this can emerge from different topics, like it could be about politics, or sometimes it could be about books. I can say, oh, this is a very good book, but you might not agree with me. You would say this is a very bad book. Same is the case with sports, movies, etc. And mostly these kind of argumentative topics would be debatable kind of statements. So the best example would be love marriages are good. Suppose if I say love marriages are the best, there would be many who would oppose me. Some of you might say, or some of you might agree with me that yes, love marriages are good. But some others would disagree with me and say arranged marriages are more better. Again, look at the other topic. Eradicating poverty is the first step in making India a superpower. Some of you would agree with this, but some others would say it is not poverty, it is unemployment that has to be resolved first. So you will be definitely having different opinions on topics. So the main intention here in this argumentative style of writing is to persuade the readers and to convince them regarding your statements. And people will not easily trust your statement unless you give them the right kind of supporting evidence. Now, statements agreed by everyone will not be considered as a debatable topic. There are some realities around us, some kind of truths. Look at this. The sun rises in the east. If I'm going to say this, I'm sure nobody is going to object me. Nobody is going to disagree with me because we know it is a reality. It is a truth. So these kind of statements will have only one single dimension. Everyone would agree with it. Now look at the second example. Plants absorb carbon dioxide. Now nobody can disagree with me because this is a scientific truth. So these kind of statements will not fall under the category of argumentative style or debatable kind of topics. Now, when you write an argumentative essay, there are two steps involved. The first one includes the premises and then comes the conclusion. With the first part, it means you are supporting the conclusion by giving out a number of quotes, charts, and statistics. So you have to prove that your statement is right. Let's talk about another point, like sometimes if it is about online classes. If I would say these are the reasons why I say online classes are the best, someone else would come up with some other reasons and justifications and prove that online classes are bad. So you have to support your conclusion with quotations, maybe quotations written by other people, sometimes charts, sometimes statistical data, etc. And you have to begin this argumentative essay with a thesis statement. So thesis statement is actually the main argument line of the entire topic, what you are trying to say or what you're trying to suggest. So this should actually come in the first paragraph, and the remaining paragraphs should be those statements proving your point, proving your first statement. So, what are the features of argumentative writing? The author takes a standpoint, we already know that, and the author makes a claim because the author believes that this is right, and his main intention is to make his readers believe that his point is correct. This claim is only one approach to the issue, so please remember the way in which you argue with one side, another person will be having the same freedom to argue against you. Suppose if I say computer learning is very good, you have the right to say computer learning is not really good. So you can prove it with your own justifications and I can prove it with my own statements. So to persuade the readers by accepting your view, so that is your main intention, which means you should prove it with logical statements. And your style of writing should be clear, logical, and convincing. And these reasons should be supported with evidence. So, this is the most important part. And if you look at certain areas like humanities and literature, various interpretations are possible. If you look at certain characters in certain novels or movies, people can come up with different interpretations about those characters. So it is not very easy to set your view with one single side in these kind of cases. But you have a better option when you talk about a scientific kind of topics. So let's take two examples here. Is online teaching really good for students? So this is a debatable topic. Again, Indians can survive without English. This is again another example where you can say, yes, Indians can survive. On the other hand, some others can disagree by saying Indians cannot survive because English is a universal language. You need English when you are traveling. So these are the supporting statements. So this is how you prove it. So now we are moving on to the next one. With this, we come to the end of argumentative writing and we are proceeding with the next one. This is comparing and contrasting. And I'm sure this part doesn't require a great introduction because you have been studying this right from your school days, comparing and contrasting. And as human beings, we do it on an everyday basis, right? Because we have a natural tendency to find similarities. We have a tendency to compare things. Now, in psychology, we normally say we shouldn't compare babies, we shouldn't compare children. So we compare it. That's a natural tendency. Suppose if the teacher is giving you your answer papers, what do you do normally? You look at your marks and then you start asking your friends about their marks. So you start comparing it, how much you have got and how much I have got, who has got the highest. So this is a kind of comparison that you make, and this is quite normal with human beings. So in technical terms, this kind of a comparison is good because it helps you to analyze things in a meaningful way. And apart from this, in today's world, this kind of a comparing and contrasting is really helpful in many business establishment to analyze data and reality in a different space. Now, one thing which you have to note here is that when you are going to compare and contrast, the two elements that you are bringing forward should have some similarities. At the same time, they should have some contradictory features too. Only then you would be able to draw the similarities and compare it and then speak about the differences and then contrast it. For example, you cannot speak about two houses in the very same order because you cannot contrast it here because they might be having so many similarities but not many differences. At the same time, you can compare and contrast a flat and an independent house. So this is how you do it. Now, when you compare and contrast, the steps involved can begin with an introduction. You can introduce what you are going to compare and contrast. Sometimes it could be of some concepts, sometimes it could be of some ideologies, or sometimes like very common topics like a flat and a house. So in the first part, in the introduction, you would be discussing this topic, and in the second part, you would be probably drawing the similarities or maybe comparison, and then you would be contrasting it. Or sometimes there is another kind of method whereby you compare and contrast simultaneously. You're not separating it, you compare it in one line and in the very next line you contrast it, then again you compare it. So that is one way of mixing up things. Or you can use it in a different way, like you're comparing it initially, speaking about all the similarities, and then you are contrasting it, speaking about all the differences. So both these methods can be adopted, and finally comes conclusion. So the best example here to compare and contrast would be women's colleges and mixed colleges. So there are lots of similarities that you can bring in, at the same time lots of differences. So now we are moving on to the next one, which is cause and effect. Now again, this is something which everyone knows, cause and effect. So if you look at this table, you can see when one event causes another to happen, the cause is actually why it happens, and the effect is actually what happens. So you can see this is a method of analyzing. So the best example would be, suppose you are late to your class, you are late to reach the college during the first hour, you would probably be having a specific reason for that. Sometimes you would say your college bus was late, or sometimes you would say it was raining heavily, or sometimes there was a traffic block, or sometimes there was an accident on the road. So all these are the causes which is giving the effect that you are late to the class. So in a way, this is known as a causal analysis, a very simple kind of analysis. So the effect will come into place only because of a cause. Otherwise, there is no effect. So they are interconnected, they are interdependent in a way, you can say. So the examples can be health issues with drug use. So only when you use drugs you would be having health issues. So this is how the cause effect relationship would take place. Child obesity and its effects. So you would be having some kind of negative effects if you are actually having more weight than the desired one. Again, impact of flood in Kerala. Now, lots of people lost their homes. Lots of people actually passed away in this disaster. So, all these can be considered as the final effect of this flood. So, now we come to the end of part 2, where we have already discussed three terms beginning from argumentation, then comparing and contrasting, and finally cause and effect. Now please make sure that you go through the examples given in your textbook. Now I would suggest that you stop this video right now and try digesting those elements which you have already studied, because right now we have completed 6 terms, and I would really ask you to keep the next one, that is part 3, for the next day. So I would suggest that you should stop it now, pause it now, and keep the next part, that is a third part, for another day, because these are not very interesting kind of terms, because they are technical terms where you cannot do a by heart study, which means you have to understand things, digest it, swallow it, and then place it in your brain to remember things. So my suggestion is to stop this for the day and think about the previous 3 terms which we had already discussed in part 1 and the 3 terms which we have discussed today. So understand these 6 terms fully and then proceed to part 3. So here we go with part 3, and with part 3 we begin with the term definition. So as you can see, definition is actually an exact description. It is a way of explaining a word or a phrase. So there are different ways of explaining it, and different components can be a part of it. Sometimes you define an object. Now, if you check a dictionary, you can see how you can define a laptop or how you can define a device. Or sometimes definition can be given for ideas, a kind of a concept, an idea. Or sometimes it can be given for some kind of technical terms. So all these will be having some kind of definition. So in a way, you are explaining it in simple terms. That is how you define it. So definitions keep changing. So this is another important thing that you have to keep in your mind, because definitions will not always remain with the same meaning. The best example to understand this would be the term terrorism, because terrorism has started gaining a different level of interpretation from September 11 attack onwards. So sometimes with the passage of time, definitions can also change. Again, there are different kinds of definitions. If you are explaining a term to a group of academicians, you can dive straight into your definition. But on the other hand, if you are going to talk about some terms to a group of very ordinary people, you just can't dive straight into the definition. They will not understand it. So definitely you will have to start with an introduction, you will have to speak about the origin, you have to talk about the history, etc. For example, suppose let's take something like male gaze. Maybe this could be a new term for you. Male gaze is something which comes in feminist film theory. So if you are a science student, suppose if I just dive into the definition of male gaze, it will not be easy for you to understand. Maybe a literature student might be able to understand it. But if I am talking about this male gaze to a science student or sometimes to a BCom student, I will have to introduce the topic. I will have to say the male gaze is actually something which emerged from feminism. So then I will have to explain to you what feminism is. Then I will have to tell you films and feminism got connected and it became feminist film theory. And then I have to talk about this male gaze, which is again connected with films and how this has been interpreted by feminist theorists. So this is how you explain things. You cannot dive straight into the definition. So you have to look at the audience or the readers, and then you have to implement a method in definition. Another example would be tragedy. If I'm talking to a student from a drama or arts, they would easily understand it. At the same time, if I am talking to a law student and diving straight into tragedy, he or she might not be able to understand this. So I would have to tell them this is a part of drama. Drama can be classified into tragedy and comedy. Tragedy means it ends in death and suffering. Comedy means it ends in happiness. So this is how you give an introduction and then you define the term. So some examples that you can see here is define photosynthesis. So this is again a scientific term. The next one is define personification. I'm sure you remember personification. You have definitely gone through these figures of speech in your first and second semesters of general English. So these are some of the terms connected with definition. So some general instructions that you have to keep in mind when you're defining something. The first important thing is understanding the audience. Now this is very important. To which group you are communicating is very important, because your definition should be based on that. If you're going to talk about a definition To a group who are not familiar with that, you have to start with a little bit of background information. Now, the second thing is that always keep an objective tone. So, objective means your personal touch is not coming there. Sometimes, when you relate it with your personal experiences, it becomes more subjective. So, definitions can always sound good in an objective tone. The next one is to keep it logical and clear. More than that, it is always good to give some background information like how this originated and how this becomes applied in certain disciplines, etc. Now, certain terms will have different interpretations in different disciplines. Now, the example can be the term culture. Now, culture is defined in a peculiar way on a social aspect if you look at the discipline anthropology. If you look at literature, culture is all about how individuals take it in their individual mode. Now, agriculture considers culturing in a different aspect. In medicine, again, this culture comes as a different term. So, with different disciplines or with a change of disciplines, sometimes the same terms would be having different definitions. Or sometimes when you discuss definition, you can also give the dictionary meaning in order to make it more reliable to the readers. So now let's move on to the next one. This is process analysis. And I'm sure this is something which all of you might have gone through at least once in your lifetime. At least you might have gone through some cookbooks or sometimes a few instruction manuals or guides. Now, process analysis means it explains the process of doing something. So there is a logical method like 1, 2, 3. It has to come on that logical plane. Now, process analysis happens in two different ways. Now, one is informational process analysis and the other one is directional process analysis. Now, informational process analysis is actually in an objective style because you are just giving information, nothing more than that. You are just passing information, and the example here can be how earthquakes happen, or how aeroplanes fly, how snakes reproduce. So they are very, very objective in their tone, which means you are just giving the information. How earthquakes can happen, you are going to speak about those things like the different levels of the earth, what happens, this happens first, the second thing is this. So it goes like this. So there is nothing personal in that, there is nothing subjective. The next one is directional process analysis. This is more direct in its way of communication. Now, today during lockdown days, you might have come across a number of YouTube channels where a lot of cooking recipes are given. So, for example, how to bake a cake. This is a directional kind of process analysis because the person who is giving out this recipe would tell you first you have to take the pan, then you have to grease it with a little bit of ghee, then you have to pour the batter inside. So, there is a logical order, and you can't actually change this order because if you change this order, the entire process is gone. So you have to maintain this order. The next one would be how to assemble a computer. Suppose you buy a new laptop. Suppose you want to connect it. What do? You check the instruction manual, and by looking at the instructions, you start connecting it one by one. They will tell you you have to install the battery first, then you have to remove this pin, then you have to plug in the other one. So this is what happens. So there is this directional process analysis, and it has to be in a logical order. Now, let it be informational or directional. In both cases, it should take a logical order. So this is what you call as process analysis. And you might have studied the term flow chart in your school days. So this is something similar to that. The only difference is that this is a higher version of flow chart whereby you are explaining the process or the different ways one by one. Now, the last one that we are going to discuss here is classification. So, classification doesn't require a great introduction because you know what is classification. It is a method of categorizing. So to make it very simple, look at the degree course you are studying. Definitely in your college, you would be having different categorizations. You would be having BSc students, BA students, you would be having BCom students. So this is how you classify. So any analysis or process becomes easier with division. So it is easy when you divide it. And that is why if you look at the textbooks, even in your textbooks, you can see there is an order that they maintain. If you look at the text Zeitgeist, you can see all the gender studies chapters are coming in one set. All the environmental issue related chapters are in another set. Those chapters related with human rights, they come in another category. So this is an easy way to understand things or to analyze things. So when broader topics are divided and classified into smaller parts, it becomes very easy. It is easy to understand. Maybe you will have the combination classes, your general English classes, where 2 or 3 classes would be coming together. So this is again another kind of division. Or sometimes in classrooms, you classify the student by yourself. Like sometimes you call certain students as very studious. Again, you have the mediocre kind of students. You have the attention seeking kind of students. You have those students who never get into the class and sit in the regular classes. So this is how you categorize. So categorization or classification will help you to place things in different orders so that you can understand it in a better way. Now, the best example for this would be the essay that we studied in the last semester, the essay by E.V. Lucas, which is titled as Bose. Now, you can see in this essay, Lucas is actually classifying Bose. He talks about the different kinds of Bose. So you get a variety of Bose because we all believe that Bose means Bose. But no, Lucas says that even among Bose there are different categories. So with this, we come to the end of this unit. So thank you very much for your patient listening. If you have any queries or if you need any more assistance, please feel free to connect with me in my email ID. So thank you very much. Thank you.